The war between the Star Wars prequels and sequels has raged on viciously since 2015 when The Force Awakens was released. Every day, hundreds of thousands of Star Wars fans discuss and debate the all-important question of which trilogy is the best, and since a couple of people actually care about my Star Wars opinions, I thought I'd offer my input on the matter. Now, this isn't a question about the best Star Wars trilogy because it's generally agreed upon that the original trilogy is by far the strongest in terms of cohesion, structure, and quality. Now, it's a battle between the sequels and the prequels because this is the topic that the most people seem to disagree on. However, this video isn't going to have a definitive answer because I could never choose between these two trilogies. The prequels were a big part of my childhood and the nostalgia I feel towards them is probably only overshadowed by The Lord of the Rings and maybe Naruto. The sequels, on the other hand, I haven't loved for nearly as long, but I've defended their honor more times than I can even count, and my channel is a living testament to that. It's gotten to a point where I see them as my babies, so I can't and I won't choose between these trilogies, but instead I'll try to highlight some of the positive aspects of each of the two trilogies, along with what I believe they each do better than the other. Hopefully it'll give a little insight into why there are people who like one trilogy but carry intense dislike or even hatred towards the other. Naturally, it is my opinion, so if you agree or disagree with me, then leave your own opinions down in the comments. Other than that, let's just get into it. One thing I believe the prequels do better than the sequels is world building and creativity. I've said this on multiple occasions in the past, but the Clone Wars era is my absolute favorite era of Star Wars. The interesting and diverse planets and creatures, the politics, although occasionally being a tad bit boring or just miscommunicated, are interesting for the most part. The trilogy brings up unexplored moral questions about the Sith and the Jedi and sets up the original trilogy perfectly. The clone and droid armies are just awesome, and yeah, there's just a lot of uniqueness in the prequels. For example, the opening long shot at the beginning of Revenge of the Sith is gorgeous and stunning, and overall the prequels just add a lot to the Star Wars universe in terms of world building. I'd say more than the sequels do. Now don't get me wrong, the sequels aren't the uncreative pieces of trash barring all of their nuance from the originals that people say they are, because they do add a lot of new shit to Star Wars. But sometimes they're a little bland with their designs. Planets like Crait and Ahch-To are new and exciting, but Jakku is just another Tatooine. The alien species of Cantabite and Ahch-To are creative and lively, but the Red Stormtroopers are just stormtroopers but red. I think you get the point. Basically, although the sequels definitely have more original design work than people give them credit for, they don't quite compare to the design work of the prequels, which just have endless amounts of unique craft work at every corner. If you enjoy the wacky aspects of Star Wars, if you're always intrigued by the Jawas or the Sarlacc in the originals, then you'll probably enjoy the prequels more than the sequels. However, despite the plethora of creativity that lurks in the prequels, the actors who have to portray the emotions of the films don't do as great of a job as in the sequels. I've said this before and I'll say it again, I think the sequel trilogy has the best acting out of the trilogy of trilogies. Yes, even counting the originals. I don't know, I just personally never felt strong emotions when Luke is crying after hearing Vader is his father. I don't think it's that impressive of a performance. Most of the shock comes from the scene, and the main reason it's so iconic is due to the news we've just heard, not because of Luke's own shock. As they say, acting is reacting. Now, I'm not saying Mark Hamill did a bad job in the originals. For the most part, he has one of the best performances in the trilogy, but he does a much better job as Luke in The Last Jedi, because he's matured greatly as an actor. I think that performance is one of the best of the entire franchise. It's filled with subtlety, emotion, intelligence, and depth, and Hamill truly sells this version of Luke, which is a direction he initially disagreed with, so props to him for still delivering a stunning performance. I just think the sequels have some pretty great performances, ranging from Adam Driver, who is just a phenomenon, Harrison Ford, who reignites our love for Han, to Oscar Isaac, who kills it in The Last Jedi. There's just a lot of versatility in the acting of this trilogy, which is something I think the prequels lack. Don't get me wrong, the prequels have some truly amazing actors like Natalie Portman, Samuel L. Jackson, and Hayden Christensen, but a lot of them don't get utilized correctly, so their talents unfortunately go to waste. The acting most of the time ranges from emotionless emotionless to childlike overacting. I don't think the arguments defending the acting hold up either, because yes, I know the Jedi are supposed to be emotionless and stoic, and they're not supposed to talk like we do, but the characters speak weirdly too in The Lord of the Rings, and yet we still resonate with those characters. Just because it's Shakespearean language doesn't mean the dialogue can't be exciting and realistic. I just wish the actors had some levels of subtlety in their performances, which in my opinion would elevate the story by making the Jedi seem more like humans rather than robots, and would eventually make Order 66 much more emotionally resonant, because let's be honest with ourselves, that scene is mainly as sad as it is because of the music. Without John Williams' score, it would just be a bunch of Jedi we don't know or care about being murdered. The Clone Wars drastically fixes this problem because it allows some of these unknown characters like Kit Fisto, Plo Koon, and Ayla Secura to have personalities and characteristics of their own, and therefore it really fucking hurts when you realize these characters that you've just grown to like get brutally murdered later on. It definitely helps enhance the experience during Order 66. On the other side of the spectrum, however, of shitty prequel acting, the overacting of Anakin is often blamed on the fact that he's just a horny teenager who has to suppress his emotions since childhood, so therefore he doesn't know how to act like a human being, but sometimes it just doesn't work. I'm sorry. I personally don't feel his anger after he kills the Tusken Raiders and is telling Padme the story. I find the overacting comical, which kind of takes away from the emotions I'm meant to feel. Now, I'm not just trying to shit on the actors of the prequels, because there are naturally some good moments too. Ewan McGregor is the star of the trilogy, and his performance in the last two movies is filled with so much life and depth, which makes Obi-Wan by far my favorite character in the prequels, and I know a lot of people feel the same way. Hayden Christensen has some really good moments too, for example when his mom dies in his arms, or when Padme tells him they're having a baby. The subtlety in Hayden's performance is at times genuine and really engaging. Natalie Portman really sells Padme's heartbreak and anguish at the end of Revenge of the Sith, and when it literally kills her, her acting makes us believe it. But the acting just isn't great all the time in this trilogy, and I believe the sequels, although they occasionally have mediocre and wooden acting as well, generally have some pretty decent performances with a lot of emotion and complexity. But you know what? I think the reason for this is pretty simple. The acting in the prequels is lacking because the dialogue is just not the best. It's no secret that George Lucas occasionally writes clunky dialogue. It's not necessarily a bad thing because Lucas focuses more on picture, sound, and style rather than dialogue writing, which is his unique filmmaking style. I mean, the original Star Wars trilogy isn't a masterpiece for its dialogue, but rather for the spectacle, the adventure, the epicness. Dialogue problems occurred even back then, most notably that weird Leia quote in A New Hope. However, the issue became a bit more prevalent in the prequels, as a lot of the actors couldn't make the best of what they were given. At its best, the dialogue in the prequels is legendary with memorable and memeable phrases, but at its worst, the dialogue can break the immersion. The dialogue is so awkward at times that even Ewan McGregor, the light of our lives, couldn't make it sound not cringy. Now, acting and dialogue aren't necessarily the most vital aspects of filmmaking, especially not for fun action-adventure films, but it could just be a reason why some people don't gravitate as much towards the prequels, because they need solid acting to engage with the story. Also, the dialogue and acting is not horrible. I've seen much worse. I just think the sequels do it a little better. However, nothing can top the lightsaber battles of the prequels. Well, let me say that again. Nothing can top two of the best lightsaber battles of the prequels. The Darth Maul fight and the Obi-Wan vs. Anakin fight are often praised as the best lightsaber fights in the entire trilogy, and even some of the best in the franchise as a whole. The Darth Maul fight is for many the best part of Phantom Menace because it's just so epic and the music fucking bangs, with Duel of Fates becoming an instant Star Wars classic. However, I personally don't think it has much depth to it. There aren't really any emotions in the fight itself. Of course it's sad when Qui-Gon dies, and the fight itself is intense, but there's no connection between Obi-Wan and Darth Maul. So I'd say that Anakin vs. Obi-Wan is better. There's so much passion within this one fight alone, because we've seen this friendship slowly grow and turn into a father-son or a brotherly relationship over the course of the entire trilogy. But then it all just crumbles around them, and it's an exclusive fight of morality and perspective. This is a fight that once you analyze it beyond just the the epic choreography is filled to the brim with emotion. It has that same depth of storytelling that the Luke vs Vader fight in Return of the Jedi had, but this one also has the benefit of being one of the most epic fights in all of cinema. This is a fight with no real winners. It has something that I don't think most of the fight scenes in the sequels have. Rey vs Kylo in The Force Awakens and Rey and Kylo vs the Praetorian Guards are both epic fights that I personally find very entertaining despite the flawed choreography in the latter, but they just don't have the same emotional resonance that the Obi-Wan vs Anakin fight does. Luke vs Kylo and the second Rey vs Kylo fight overflow with similar levels of emotions but don't have the pizzazz to bring it up to the same level. The Obi-Wan vs Anakin fight just have the best of both worlds, that being amazing external and internal conflict, and I think it's one of the best fight scenes in the whole Star Wars franchise. However, the prequels also have some pretty dull fights such as the Obi-Wan, Anakin and Yoda vs Count Dooku fight. It just looks goofy and becomes very stale to watch. So yes, even though the prequels occasionally had boring fights, the greatness they reached in terms of lightsaber combat is unrivaled in my opinion, and on a level that the sequels weren't able to achieve. I just love it. Then there are a lot of aspects that I believe they do very similar, things that I don't necessarily think set them apart from each other. The action in both trilogies is quite hit or miss for me. They both have action scenes that are exciting and thrilling, but they also both contain quite dull and storyless action. The prequels, like we mentioned before, reach great heights of action set pieces with the likes of Anakin vs Obi-Wan, Obi-Wan and Qui-Gon vs Darth Maul, the opening space battle to Revenge of the Sith, and the arena scene in Attack of the Clones. However, they also fall to puny depths with scenes such as There's Always a Bigger Fish scene, or the pod racing scene, or Yoda vs Count Dooku, or the factory scene. Sometimes I'm thrilled and engaged, and other times I'm bored as hell. But this also happens with the sequels. You have great actions such as Rey vs Kylo Ren, both of them. You have the Starkiller base run, the Dreadnought bombing scene, you have Rey and Kylo vs the Praetorian Guards, which yes, of course, if you slow it down, the choreography is flawed, but you can say the same about Obi-Wan vs Darth Maul. Just a quick hint when you're watching movies, don't slow them down. It kinda defeats the purpose. But alas, the sequels also fall greatly in scenes such as the Canto Bight chase scene, or Rey vs Palpatine, or most of the Exegol battle. Both trilogies have great action scenes, but they also have boring and stale action scenes, so I can't really use action as a means of comparison here. The characters in both trilogies are also quite hit or miss. In the sequels, there is great depth and complexity to a lot of characters like Luke, Kylo Ren, Finn in The Force Awakens, and even Rey. These characters are intriguing to me because they possess human emotions and, more importantly, human flaws. They make the story much more engaging. However, then we have characters like Rose and basically every other character than those I've already mentioned in The Rise of Skywalker. They just don't do it for me, and it's sad to see poorly written characters in the same film as well-written characters, because the former just hold a ladder and the film as a whole down. But it's similar in the prequels, because on the plus side you have some great characters like Obi-Wan and Palpatine, interesting characters like Anakin, Padme, Yoda to some extent, and Qui-Gon. But then you have characters that just have no emotion connected to them, such as Mace Windu, basically all the Jedi in the Council, General Grievous, Count Dooku, and more. Again, these less than average characters take away from the excitement of the more nuanced characters. Both trilogies have this problem, so there's that. And finally, I can't use the visual effects of the two trilogies as an argument here, because of course the sequels look better in most aspects than the prequels. They were created 15 years later, so naturally the CGI and practical effects just look cleaner, smoother, and more refined. Instead of the stale and emotionless green screen walking scenes that are present in the prequels, the sequels pop with excitement in a lot of places. However, the prequels are quite ahead of their time in a lot of aspects. Occasionally, they're still really good. I mean, it's mainly Revenge of the Sith that looks great for the most part, but I don't think it's fair to judge the prequels based on their visual effects against a trilogy that is 15 years younger. It's just unfair. Overall, from my assessments of the trilogy so far, I've begun seeing a trend that the sequels tend to be stronger movies than the prequels when you deconstruct them on a filmmaking basis. Acting, scene writing, dialogue, it just seems to me that the sequels have the technical fundamentals of filmmaking more intact check than the prequels do. However, the prequels focus more on the fantasy elements. They're adventure films that place more emphasis on creativity, world building, and epicness. This distinction could help explain why the sequels tend to be rated higher by film critics, whereas the prequels do better with the Star Wars fans and the general public. The films are great at what they each try to do, and because they each fail and succeed at different things, it's impossible for fans to find a common ground in their arguments because the films cater to different opinions, preferences, and priorities. I think it's hard to say which trilogy is best just based on individual movies, so instead we still need to address the elephant in the room. There is one major thing holding the sequels back. By far the biggest problem they have, and the thing that ruined them completely in the eyes of so many fans, is continuity. It's pretty common knowledge that the planning that went into the sequels wasn't the greatest, because there likely wasn't a written plan from the beginning, or at least one that stuck throughout the production of the trilogy, given how The Rise of Skywalker retcons a plethora of things from The Last Jedi. It is vital for a trilogy to have cohesion, or at least an outline of what the beginning, middle, and end will look like, what the final goals are, what story the trilogy is meant to tell as a unit, and what part each film plays in telling that story. Look at The Lord of the Rings as an example. These movies are the perfect trilogy because they all help tell the same story. They all build off of one another, and it was all planned from the beginning. They shot all three movies at the same time in one go as if it was all just one long movie, which is why they're all so close in quality and fit so perfectly together. This same level of coherence is not present in the sequels because even though I personally think that The Force Awakens and The Last Jedi really work well together and tell a cohesive story, The Rise of Skywalker breaks this immersion and makes a lot of creative decisions from The Last Jedi completely obsolete. And it doesn't matter if it's the fans who pressure Disney into making The Rise of Skywalker how it is, because that's not an excuse. It's a reason, but not an excuse. A company such as Disney shouldn't be able to be bullied by fans. They should stick to their own guns, their own ideas, and not give in to pressure. Trust me, it's alright, and even encouraged to listen to what the fans want, and give them some of that. But they should have realized that these people viciously hating on The Last Jedi, not the people that just didn't like it, I'm talking about the toxic fans who took part in the bullying. The creators and producers should have realized that these people were going to do the same no matter how the final chapter ended up, even if it was a perfect movie. They had already made up their minds about the sequel trilogy, so instead of following the story that they had created and making a satisfying conclusion for the fans who really actually enjoyed the first two sequel films, they made a movie that gave the sequel haters a lot more things to bash on than before, and they simultaneously created a film that disappointed even the sequel lovers. This was poor judgment from Disney. Horrible judgment even, because the lack of boldness broke the cohesion of a trilogy that had some interesting things going for it and definitely had potential up until the final film. And unlike the sequels, the prequels actually have a satisfying conclusion. Revenge of the Sith is easily the best part of the prequel trilogy and helps make the occasionally subpar episode 1 and 2 into something much greater. It's never how a film begins that truly matters to the viewing experience, it's how it ends. How you walk away from a film completely depends on its ending because it's all about the emotions you're left with. It's exactly the same for trilogies. You're only as good as your last film. The strength of a trilogy as a whole depends heavily on the conclusion, because without a satisfying ending, even the greatest storytelling in the beginning and middle become almost inconsequential because the plot threads, the emotions, and the character development just don't pay off in any satisfying way. This is why I believe that the prequel trilogy is overall a stronger trilogy, although I strongly believe that The Force Awakens and The Last Jedi are far more enjoyable, to me at least, than The Phantom Menace and Attack of the Clones in terms of individual qualities. However, Revenge of the Sith greatly outshines The Rise of Skywalker. I personally think that these three movies, that being The Force Awakens, The Last Jedi, and Revenge of the Sith, are on par with each other, and which one I like the most all depends on my mood. Revenge of the Sith is heartbreaking and emotional in ways that most of the films in this franchise aren't, but then The Last Jedi is such an intriguing and conceptual film that has a touch of filmmaking creativity not often seen in this franchise either. Then we have The Force Awakens, which is arguably the most overall structurally sound film in the franchise since Empire. I love all of these films and I believe them to be decent films, not just good Star Wars movies. I consider them the best of their respective trilogies. However, even though I don't view episodes 1 and 2 as necessarily good movies, I still believe they add much more cohesion to the trilogy than The Rise of Skywalker does to the sequels. When you watch the prequels, you feel like there's a thread running through the films, and you don't get this as much with the sequels. The Rise of Skywalker is an image of mediocrity, and a film being bullied into insignificance. Whereas episodes 1 and 2, no matter the technical quality, are fun, light-hearted space adventure movies that still work to set up complex themes. There's a notable difference. To conclude, even though I believe some films to be better than others, and that both the sequels and the prequels have things that they each do better, I believe that the prequel trilogy is the stronger trilogy as a whole. However, that is just my opinion. You lot are bound to think differently than I do, and I want to hear all of your opinions on the matter. Which trilogy do you believe is the better out of the prequels or the sequels? Do you agree or disagree with any of my specific points? Just please remember to keep it civil. I want debate. That means civil discussion, not name calling or cursing at each other. There's just no need for that. All it does is make you seem like a dick. Other than that, if you enjoyed this video, then please do leave a like and perhaps subscribe to the channel. It would help greatly on our journey to 1,000 subscribers. Other than that, join my Discord for more conversations on Star Wars and other nerdy content. Follow me on Twitter, I am hilarious. Both links can be found in the comments. Otherwise, I wish you all a wonderful day, stay safe, and peace out.